So, Assalamu alaikum again. My name is Arshia Ali Khan, and I'm the Director of Development here at American Islamic College. I am super excited to have all of you here and these wonderful panelists, who I'm also honored to call my friends. Super excited with WBEZ for coming up with this amazing idea and other conversations that they've been doing on this topic. So I will allow them to go into details with you on that. And before we begin the official program, I'd like to welcome Kathleen O'Brien, who is American Islamic College Vice President of Academic Affairs, to share with you a little bit about what's happening here at American Islamic College and what you guys can look forward to. So please welcome Kathleen and all of you.
Thank you, Arshia. I won't take much time. I've only been here a year and a little amount of time, but what I love about the place is that it is really the Islamic face of higher education in Chicago. We are trying to be, I would call mindful education the best of Islamic tradition and religion and a liberal arts framework. And we're going to add majors and programs in the future. Right now we have Islamic studies in the undergraduate and the graduate program, and the MDiS divinity program in the graduate. Anybody who wants to know more about that, we're very happy to tell you. But we're growing, and we hope you pass the word, because we think we're an exciting new place, a face of Islam here. And Arshia is a wonderful friend. We're glad we're here.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, guys. Let's get the conversation started.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I'm Alexandra Solomon. I am the editor of WBEZ's CuriousCity project, which, if you're not familiar with it, is our project where we get questions from the public, and we go out and find the answers to those questions. We conduct an investigation, and how I got here is actually through a question we got from a listener about relations, particularly within the African American and Arab Muslim communities. So we had one story that we did out of that, which everybody can find at wbez.org/CuriousCity if you're curious. And out of that came a desire to continue the conversation. And so here I am tonight, continuing the conversation. And the idea behind tonight's, sorry if it's, I think that's a little better. The idea really is we're gonna kind of warm you up. We'll have a few of my questions, and then we're gonna open it up to all of you. And we collected a nice little stack here of this. I've divided. What can the community do to become more inclusive on this side? And this is what creates divisions. So the divisions pile is smaller than the solutions pile, which I guess that's where we're at. So that's the starting point, and I'm gonna read some of these during the convo and continue to send us your questions and throughout, as if they come to you during the event. There's a way to do it through our website, which you had in your link, or write them on the piece of paper that you've been given. Let's get started. So what I'd like, I kind of want each, I'm gonna have all the panelists introduce themselves, just kind of your name and what you do. Sorry.
Get to go first. Assalamu alaikum. That is, may the peace that only God can give be upon you. So I'll be quick. Bios can sometimes take a minute, but I don't do that much. So I'll give you 3 jobs in order. First, I am I'm the Imam of Masjid al-Taqwa, located on the southeast side of Chicago, 8211 South Exchange. And I've been in that position for going on 4 years now. I am the executive director and founder of Bridging the Gap, which is a organization dedicated to service, education, and leadership. We host a program called Lunchpad, which is a fancy way of saying lunch preparation and distribution, right? We've been doing that for the past 5 years, and we do it primarily out of Masjid al-Taqwa, and that's been, and inshallah we'll get into that may come up. And the last is my position that I've been in for the past about going on 3 months now and that is host of Radio Islam. We broadcast on WCV 1450 AM, 6 to 7 p.m., which means that I was not on tonight. But that is what pre-recorded shows up for. And we'll just stop right there. And family man. Yeah.
Great. Assalamualaikum. My name is Surur Rahimullah. Have been working in the community in many different ways for the majority of my life. I grew up with parents who community service was built into our blood. And currently right now I am a board member at an organization called Muslim Women's Alliance, which is focused on empowering and developing women. It was created 10 years ago because in a particular niche because we felt like it was important to focus and help the community develop while we develop women. And so we do a lot of different programs. But really, if you were to take anything away, it's a way to kind of get rid of any gender inequities that we have within our community and our spaces. So.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Will Caldwell. I'm a PhD candidate at Northwestern University, and I focus on Islam and American religions. I'm also very involved with the Tatlif Collective, working with the Convert Care Program. And I am also a history editor at the blog Sapelo Square, which focuses on African American Muslim history and arts and culture. So do check us out. I listen to CuriousCity, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Hind Makki. I'm also a fan of CuriousCity and WBEZ and public radio. I'm also a fan of AIC. I'm so happy to see everyone here today. There's at least 3 other really incredible events that mean something to our communities, and so I'm happy to see a full room tonight, and inshallah those other rooms are also full. I'm the founder and curator of a website called Side Entrance, and that documents women's prayer experiences in mosques in the United States and across the world. And through that work, I am a contractor with ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, as well as the ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where I was an advisor for a study called Reimagining Muslim Spaces, looking at how mosques, specifically mosques, but also third spaces, welcome quote-unquote marginalized Muslims, women, people of different ethnic backgrounds from the majority of the mosque, and young people and converts. And now what I do is I travel across the country, and I do workshops and I consult with mosques on how they can be more welcoming to all of those groups, as well as more mainstream Muslims, Arab and South Asian men. And yeah, that's some of what I do.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we got all your professional bios. Now I want you to kind of just step back for a minute, and if you would, give us a sense of kind of what brought each of you here tonight to have this conversation at this particular moment. And I'll start with you, Hind.
Yeah, okay, so I was really honored to have been part of the earlier conversation on the CuriousCity segment on the radio, really trying to answer this question of do African American and Arab Muslims attend the same mosques in Chicago, and if they do, what does that look like, and if they don't, why not? My background, actually, people who see me often assume that I'm South Asian. I'm Afro-Arab. My parents are from Sudan, which is in Northeast Africa, and I identify as a black person. I identify as an African. I identify as an Arab because I'm Arabic speaking. And because of all of this, and because of my work on women in the masjid and the mosque, I travel and I sort of hop mosques across the city of Chicago, and I can sort of be a chameleon in some ways, but also it's been kind of difficult to try to find that home mosque, that home space. And so I think this is a really critical conversation for our community to have, because I'm one of these people. While I think that third spaces are really, really important, I think that mosques should be the places where Muslims' sort of religious foundations are being solidified. And I think that American Muslims, we have a really great mercy from God for being for being the most racially diverse religious group in the country and one of the most racially diverse Muslim groups across the world. And we need to use that as an asset and not separate. And so that's where I'm coming from. That's, I'm hoping to continue this conversation on how we can build bridges across racial divides in the city.
Will, what goes next?
Okay, that's a great answer. I guess I should say, really, I'm here because Hen invited me. But I'll try to answer for myself. I am, in the course of my studies, I've focused on issues of race and Islam in the United States. So a lot of my, I would say, interest in the topic and experience with the topic does come from a more academic route, and it comes through my research, really. But that said, my own sort of identity is somewhat interesting in being both a white and a Muslim. I too have walked a few lines since converting to Islam many years ago. And my entrance into the Muslim community writ large in this country was very much through the WD Muhammad community. That was where I found my first home mosque in Georgia, which is where I'm from originally. And that has really shaped my understanding of Islam, how to practice Islam in this country, and it really in many ways shaped my priorities both personally and academically. So that, I would say, it brings me here today, and it really informs a lot of the work that I continue to do.
Go in order,
Go
right?
in order. We'll go in order. Don't worry, I'll break it up, I promise.
So what brings me here? A couple of things bring me here. One, I think I'm clearly very passionate on gender relations, and not because it's the good thing to do for women, but it's the right thing to do for our community. For me personally, I mean, and there's plenty of stories in our Prophet ﷺ's life that talks about, how a community works, how a community structures. We've been given models, we've been given examples of how communities could work. And I think a lot of it in doing the work that I've been doing and my organization has been doing for the last few years is really realizing that what is great about being here in this country is that there's so much diversity. What is great about being Muslim is that there's so much diversity. I mean, look around this room, right? I think that's one of the beauties of Islam, but it also just means there's more work for us to do to make sure that if there are suffering, or if there are ailments, or if there are things that are being done to our own members of our community, that we each work to eradicate that. We each have a part in helping to make it better. So whether it's gender relations, whether it's cross ethnicities, cross racial, and how those relationships work. I mean, being in a city like Chicago, and I think, I know I grew up here, I think 3 of us at least have grown up here. Chicago in itself is a very segregated city, right? So not outside of the Muslim community, just on its own, it's already segregated. So that plays into, I think, how any community, whether it's a religious community or another community, also gets more further segregated in that sense. And so I think also for me, so my parents came from India, and so I'm a firstborn American here, now here. And I think also what you realize is the privileges you have, and we all have privileges, like regardless of who you are. It's understanding what those are and then doing something about it to realize that you need to kind of help continue to better the community. So I think that's why I'm really excited about this conversation, because I think it's time. I think we have to continue to have these, and this is just the beginning of that.
What do you mean by privileges?
Do you want me to go?
Go for it.
Sure. So privileges in the sense of the backgrounds that we come from, the opportunities that we may be afforded that somebody else was not afforded. So for example, if I live in a certain neighborhood, if I am a certain skin color, if I'm a certain gender. There are opportunities that are given to people that are more, that are high, they get higher priorities or higher opportunities than somebody else. So if I'm on the north side of Chicago versus being on the south side, if I'm white versus being black, if I'm male versus being female, there's a lot of different hidden privileges that are in there. And some of them are not as like obvious as maybe those are. Some of them are smaller. It could be, you know, that I have two parents could be a privilege. It could be class. I missed class, which is obviously a big thing, right? So socioeconomic class. If you have more money than somebody else, that's a privilege, right? So those are all different privileges, and if we're honest with ourselves, which I think we need to be in order to have any sort of real conversation and to improve ourselves, we all have a privilege. We just need to name it and then own it and then use it to help other people. I think that's one of the hardest things to do, is to sit down, and I went through this exercise, and I actually went, we took a bus of 55 people down to the Women's March in January. And one of the exercises was naming your privilege. And people were like, I don't, what do you mean I don't have a privilege? Like, I'm brown, or I'm this, and it's like, no, everybody has one. Even if you don't have enough money, even if you are black, even if you have something else, there's something that you have that somebody else doesn't have. And I think it's important for us to be honest and okay with knowing that and not making it seem like that's such a bad thing to have privileges. It's more, what do we do with it? That was kind of a
I
long
would have
answer,
thought
sorry.
of those things as characteristics rather than privileges.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to steal, I don't know if other people have thoughts on that, but.
I have stolen too, so I apologize.
No, it's okay. And it's characteristics, but it's also the foundation of like who you are today, right? So who I am right now, even sitting in front of you, even being able to have this opportunity to speak is a privilege, right? There's many of you who I'm sure have way better life experiences, who would probably are better to come up here, but that's a privilege that I'm having because of the work that I do, because of the leadership that I have, because of how I've been propelled, that I'm getting this opportunity to speak, right? And so while they're characteristics, they're also fundamentally, if the path was different, if the pieces of your life's puzzle was different than somebody else's, your trajectory would have been very different. So when you start to really think about those pieces that took you on this path versus somebody else, versus, you know, I mean, if we were to all sit and just talk to each other about what our own privileges are or our own paths, there might have been something along that path that just took someone in a completely different way, which is beyond just characteristics, right? Educational systems. I mean, my kids are in the CPS system. I could sit here for hours talking about, you know, that system, and I won't. But even things like education, like who gets better education than others, and how does that work, right? That in itself is a privilege. Being on, like, living in this neighborhood and getting education versus being in a different neighborhood and getting education. That's where you start to see the differences of privilege, right? And who put that person there, right? And how did that work? And then what are you doing when you know that you've got a lot of this? Sometimes it can feel very, like, overwhelming, right? If you know you have this, but the point is not for it to be overwhelming, but the point is just to kind of recognize it and then do something with it.
Thank you.
All right, Tarek, I'm not letting you get away with without answering this one. Why now? Why are you here?
All right, why am I here? I'm here for, I'll start with the first. I was also privileged to be part of the original broadcast. And those of you who heard it was about 18 minutes?
Yes, 18 minutes, 22 seconds.
Yeah, 18 minutes, 22 seconds of distilled conversation. And so we talked for about 2 hours, right? But that's the magic of radio. So I'm here for an opportunity to have this conversation with a community where everybody can kind of feel what we feel. And then it's amplified because we have so many, so much more perspective in the room. So I'm excited about that. Second reason is, and not so much reasons, as I'm thinking about it, AIC is it will always have a great place in my heart. I was a student here for almost 2 years, and just can't seem to get back here. Maybe, yeah. I'm working on cloning myself. The other reason is because this is an important conversation. As I reflect, I think my life has been about bridging gaps. It's been about erasing divides, and a lot of these things are unintentional, things that have just happened. But I can say this: my mother had me in theater. You know, she had us running around as children, putting us in front of audiences. So I mean, I've been in front of audiences, speaking, acting, since I was a little person. And I'll say this succinctly as I can. At the beginning, the audiences that I spoke to, they tended to look pretty much just like me. And as I got older, and I spoke to more and more audiences, different capacities, the audiences began to change. I looked out and I saw people who did not look exactly like me, whose native language was not my own, who did not share my religion, and so many other different, you know, boxes that we check. The boxes started becoming more and more, and this got me to a point. Coming from the community, being a part of the community, the larger Muslim community, right? And this is another conversation we could have, right? How we define what community we're with, right? But benefiting from the leadership of Imam Mark-Dean Muhammad, he took on the title of spokesperson for human salvation. And as I thought about the audiences, the people that I look at, the people that I interact with, I began to realize more and more that our main focus, it must be finding ways to connect to this common humanity. That's the larger mission. It's human dignity. So in my own small effort, my own small push, it is to build foundations and relationships where people can recognize that common humanity. Where we can really represent this community, this ummah, which is not Muslim specific, right? I think I'm talking to a pretty astute audience here. The ummah is a pluralistic community. And I can't think of a better place for that to come to fruition than in the United States, and for the Muslim community in particular to begin to realize that that is a part of its potential in leading the charge to really to express what this ummah means. So it's human salvation, it's human dignity, it's connections, and I couldn't think of a better way to express that than to be in a room with so many different perspectives and different people and backgrounds, where we could talk about some things that maybe will move us to some actions that would help us express that.
Well, I'm curious, Tariq and Soror, you mentioned how Chicago is a segregated city and that kind of plays out in different ways within the Muslim community. And Tariq, you mentioned kind of the importance of getting people together in a room, people of different backgrounds together in a room to talk about what creates divisions and then how you overcome them. So I'm curious how often you feel like these issues of what divides the community, whether it be race, class, socioeconomics, gender, how often do those things get talked about, would you say?
Should I
ahead.
start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, not nearly enough. I mean, what I talked about, what I mentioned is more the utopian idea of everybody coming together and recognizing one another and valuing each other. But the reality is that we have to see this within the framework that we live in. We have to see it within the construct of the dreaded white supremacy, right? And I hate using air quotes. Don't let me use air quotes. But we have to see it. These conversations that we don't have often. Okay, I'll give you a really short example. If there's a Muslim event, you go to the fundraiser, 9 times out of 10, you can guess what's going to be on the menu. You can guess, right? I have yet to be at an event, a quote-unquote Muslim event, where there is biryani and bean pie at the same time. Okay? Now, our recognition of one another, right? Food, language, these are elements of culture, our literature, these are elements that are the foundation for establishing the value that we see, that we extract out of our interactions with one another. So just something as small as that, and it's no malice that's there. It's just a fact that we're not sensitized. Like I know what lead-do is now, right? Who knows what lead-do is, right? A couple people, right? Lead-do. It's like a milk-based. What's it like, lentils and beans? But it's really sugar. Like you need to take insulin with it. Right? Even if you're not diabetic, you just can't eat it straight, right? But I know that because my circles continue to expand, and because of that expansion, there are people now who didn't know what bean pie was. And now on Fridays when I leave the office and I go to Juma and I come back, they looking for the bean pie. They're asking me, okay, did you bring bean pie with you, right? These are small things, but without recognizing them and taking them into account, you can't get to the bigger milestones that are necessary to create that utopia, if you will.
Did you want to add something? You were shaking your head. No.
No.
Yeah, you're good. Well, you sort of touched on this idea, I think, of through food, inclusivity, right? People feeling welcome, people feeling like they belong, and one of the things that somebody wrote here in terms of what creates divisions within Chicago's Muslim community. And they wrote ethnocentric mosques. And I saw a really interesting statistic, which was kind of a report that was kind of a study of mosques around the country, and that 75% of all mosques are attended by one dominant group, which could be African American or Arab or South Asian. And so I'm curious how that idea of sort of this mosque belongs to one group, how often you see that, let's say in a place like Chicago, do you feel like, if you've experienced that, and how that, kind of what role that plays in terms of having people feel like they belong or are welcome or not, and how, yeah. If anyone could go, Soror?
Sure. So I do think that, so I grew up here, so I've gone to a lot of different mosque communities, suburban for most of my life, and then urban, and lived in the city for the last 15 of some sort. I also lived in New York, so I have a point of comparison. And I think that it is, if we go back to privilege, like I have a privilege of being able to walk in a masjid, being of Indian descent, and just walking in and no one's gonna assume that I'm like a convert, or that I don't know, or I'm new, or I'm whatever.
Have you ever tried to walk into Noor Mosque on Granville?
I don't think I've been inside that
Well,
one.
I tried, but I was told that women were not welcome. And I asked, how come? Because isn't this a mosque? And we said, city ordinance.
Right.
I've never forgotten.
Yeah. So she asked, well, can I paraphrase
Yes.
what she said?
Go ahead.
Okay, and then actually it was sort of a secondary point that I was gonna make also. So, but I wanna be true to what your question was too. So the comment was about her being able to walk into a mosque and being told that she's not allowed in because she's a female. And when pushed and asked, why is that? Why can't I be? Isn't this a mosque? The response was, it's a city ordinance. And
City
so,
ordinance,
city ordinance, which is not correct. But what I would tell you is, between whether it's the ethnocentric, which was this particular question, I think unless we can't lead where you don't go. Like I have a mentor who has said that over and over, and you really truly cannot lead where you don't go. So if we don't show up to other communities, if we don't get a little uncomfortable, drive an extra 20 minutes, and not go to what's convenient, we're never gonna break the cycle of this problem of having divided mosques all the time, right? I'm gonna come back to your point about the gender. But the point is we each have a choice, every single one of us. We can either just go to the mosque that's right here, that's convenient, that happens to be everybody that looks like us, or we can drive for 30 minutes and go somewhere else because, one, that's how we each make the difference on building bridges. So back to what Imam Tariq was saying about building bridges doesn't happen like overnight. They happen with one person, then two people, and so forth, right? And that's where all of us, we gotta change the heart. You can only control yourself. You can only change your heart, right? You start changing your hearts, then each one of our hearts are changing, and that's how more, as a community, we grow, we repair, and we move on. But until we start doing that, until we start getting comfortable and going into areas that we maybe wouldn't normally go into, we're not gonna be able to start having that conversation, if that makes sense.
We're gonna open it up to questions in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yes, no, because I know people have a lot and the time, we started a little late, so we're just gonna move everything, just a couple minutes, I promise we'll open it up for sure. But before we do, maybe, Will, maybe you could speak to, just as someone who is converted to Islam, I'm curious what your experience has been in terms of feeling like you were welcome or belong.
Well, I don't usually just stick to the white mosque. That's a joke. As someone who's not from Chicago, I'll say that I wasn't very surprised when I came to Chicago and saw that most mosques were, also cultural centers, because I think that's sort of the trend around the country. And since we're speaking of our privileges, it is certainly my privilege, both as a man and as a white man, to really shop around and sort of look for the one that I feel most comfortable in. I'll say that the reason that I sort of found a home in the Imam W.B.E.Z. Muhammad community is because that was a place where, when I was a very new Muslim, I felt like I could walk in and I didn't have to put my learning hat on, which is not something that I was adverse to doing. You go to the masjid and there's a lot of things that, as a new Muslim, you don't know how to do. And sometimes you have some very, very generous uncles who want to show you exactly how to do it. And so you learn in these very direct ways. So you kind of have to be prepared for that when you walk into a masjid and you're still new. But it was in the Imam W.B.E.Z. Muhammad community where it felt very, and especially down in Georgia, it felt very familiar. I remember the first time I heard the Imam reciting Quran, there's a little bit of a southern twang to it. So, my experience I think is very different, but at the same time, I too did my best to settle into a place where I felt comfortable. In sort of like if not an ethnic way, and just sort of like my general culture as a southerner, that was something that sort of drew me in as well. So as much as I think that, the ethnic divides can be a problem, I certainly can't pretend to be above it. So.
I know people are eager, I hear you, eager to jump in with their questions. So the only thing, we'll open it up to questions. I may jump in or out, but I will ask you to use a mic. We have a mic for people to ask, so just everybody can hear. She's got it right here. So I believe this gentleman up front had a question.
Is it on?
Anyone hear it? Okay. I don't think masjid are the root of any problems for Muslims. I think there's just differences that we all have to get used to. I think the problem within the Muslim community has nothing to do with Islam at all. It has something to do with how we all are socialized. For an example, you have many people come from the Arab world who see people who are darker than them in particular ways. Depending on which Arab country they come from, they have different perceptions of different people. They bring that with them to this country. So it's not just if I'm a black Muslim or African American Muslim, it's how they perceive black people, or different people, or how they perceive Indians, or how they perceive, it's not Islam, it's how they are socialized. For an example, I've had the privilege to be around Muslims all over the world and visit many Muslim countries, and just had the privilege to be invisible in those countries when they're talking about other people. And that has nothing to do with the religion. It has something to do with superiority. How one group of people see themselves in relationship to another. That has played out in the Muslim community in the United States as more immigrants have come here. When I was growing up as a Muslim, I only knew Muslim to be black. When I came in contact with many immigrant Muslims, after being around them for a while, even though I disappeared among them, I still saw how they interacted and perceived other dark people. So that's more of a problem. I think that should be a part of the discussion rather than what's happening in the masjid, because masjids are natural phenomena where people are going to set up a community where they can preserve their own culture, their language, their identity, and try to keep that going. But it's much larger than that.
I believe Tarek wanted to say something.
That's a great observation, and I agree with you. And that is why and didn't really need to put white supremacy in air quotes, but that is the nature of relationships. Color stratification is a definite part of the United States, but the United States is not unique in that regard. This is around the world. But I think that it is a problem for Muslims, only in that, with Rasulullah, the Prophet, with his last sermon, he knew it was a problem because it was a problem that they already had. Pointing directly to, you don't get any extra credit because you are white or because you're black or you're Arab or not Arab. But that's not something that the Muslim community has taken on and really lived. So, there's a great deal of hypocrisy that we live with, that we don't call out. And I think the only way, I shouldn't say the only way, but one of the ways that we can challenge it, that does not simply allow its existence based on this idea of I'm trying to preserve my culture, or preserve my language, or preserve my community, is to recognize that being in America, that we have an opportunity, not just an opportunity, we are a new people. We're a new community. And the things that you may have done before, you're coming, especially for those who have immigrated. Islam didn't come here with you. Islam was already here. And to come here and to think that you can just negate what has been done, negate that present, not take it into consideration, is arrogant, and it does not do us well as a community. There has to be a way for us to acculturate Islam to the United States in a way that respects our diversity, but also respects, that expresses it in a way where we move away from the poison of color stratification, the poison of white supremacy. You know what I'm saying?
I understand exactly what you're saying, but how do you deal with little children who are being raised in the United States to think of themselves as superior to others?
If I can just quick. Jim Rohn used to say, I don't know if y'all know who Jim Rohn is, but he was like a motivational speaker, right? We just say motivational speaker. And he said that there are not a lot, he said there's only 5 or 6 really bad people in the world. He said they just move around a whole lot. Okay? The problem that we have in combating these negative influences is that we are often silent, that we're often resigned to just kind of shake our heads. The way that we address these things is when we have diversity, we have diverse audiences and groups that stand up and say, this is not acceptable in any fashion. It's not acceptable. And it must be vocal, it must be consistent, and it must be a targeted message. But the problem is, these negative, these nut jobs run around, and they have megaphones and microphones, and they have television shows, and it seems like there's a majority of them, when in actuality, it's just that the majority is silent.
I want to,
They make a lot of noise.
yeah, I want to directly answer that question and push back on something you commented a little bit earlier when you said that, you know, mosques are just going to be kind of ethnic spaces. They're going to be spaces where people want to preserve their cultures. I really believe that mosques should be in the U.S. Yes, we will always have some ethnically based mosques. But I think that every Muslim in this room here agrees with the concept that Islam is an inherently anti-racist religion, right? That we just heard about the Prophet's last sermon, where in his final sermon to his community, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he really focused on this idea of trying to break down specifically anti-blackness, but prejudice in general. Muslims believe, a lot of Muslims will point to Satan as being the first racist, right? God told him, bow down to Adam, and he was like, oh no, I'm better than him. You created me from fire, you just created him from clay. I'm better than him, I'm not gonna bow down. In that sense, in that respect, when I look at that story, I think of racism and prejudice as being outside of the architecture of what Islam is. Of God's expectation of who Muslims are, right? And I don't think that you will find any Muslim anywhere who will say, oh yes, Islam is a religion that is based on a caste system, or that there's racism that is condoned within Islam. Those very same people could also use the K word or the A word, or won't let their kid marry a convert who's white or who's Latino. Those very same people. And that is why I think that mosques, especially here in the United States, should be that space where we bring in this Islamic understanding of anti-racism as being an inherently Islamic concept, and teach that to not just young people, but to people whoever walks in. This concept of Islam was already here when people came. Well, this is what it looks like to be an American Muslim. We will not accept and we will not tolerate these prejudices, these racial, not just commentaries and digs, but really the system of racism that we see among or within our organizations, right? I want to actually tell a couple of stories. One is, I attended a large, very well-known Arab mosque in the southwest suburbs. And growing up, I constantly heard the A word. I constantly heard, anti-black, prejudice, explicit, not even implicit. I constantly heard that. And sometimes I would I would always push back when they were my peers. Sometimes it's difficult, if somebody's older than you. Yeah.
We don't know what the L word is.
Yeah. I'm talking about the A word, the abid.
Oh.
Yeah.
Slave.
Abid, yeah. Yeah. To use the Arabic word for slave to refer to black people or African Americans. And I would push back, and people would say to me, oh well, we don't mean you, because my mom was a teacher at that school, but we mean the Americans, right? And I was like, we're all American, A. B, it still doesn't make it right if you're differentiating between different kinds of Africans from different parts of the diaspora. So that was my experience, when I was a kid, when I was young, and through my high school. A few years ago, at that very same high school, in that very same community, primarily Arab, there was an incident where a girl who is black, of Latin American ancestry, was called the N-word. She wasn't even called the N-word. She was called the N-word. And the school and the community's response was to suspend the girl who had done it for a few days. And then when her suspension was over, they held a full day, event or assembly, if you will, for the entire junior high and high school, where they had women from different racial backgrounds who were Muslim come and speak about their experiences as being Muslims who were Latina or Muslims who were African American, what have you. And then they had workshops throughout the day, and then they continued that throughout the year, and they were incorporating anti-racism education in their curriculum throughout the year. So I think that, mosques, Islamic schools, Muslim institutions are the place where we can push back on the racism that we see. And I think it's just a matter of creating that curriculum. It's a matter of really working with people to say to them, we know, we all agree that racism is un-Islamic. Well, let's really try to root that out in the spaces that we're in.
I just want to add also that I think we can all do this in the dinner table conversations too, right? I mean, how many of us, if we're honest, heard a family member, heard a friend, at a family party or somewhere make some sort of comment and you just let it go, right? So, to Hin's point, this isn't a battle that only one group of people is supposed to be facing. Every single one of us needs to face this, right? But the way to do it is the kind of microaggressions or I don't want to say small because nothing is really small, but some of just in conversations we're having, the things that we let go, we have to stop letting them go. And we have to, and I say this to myself, being the brown Muslim that I am, that we have to stand up, we have to get uncomfortable, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because we're about to say something to an aunt or an uncle. And obviously there's a respectful way to say it, right? You don't have to go out and call people other names and stuff like that, but you have to say something. To say nothing is not okay. It's not what the Prophet ﷺ teaches us to do, right? We're not supposed to stay quiet. And I think that, coupled with, when you hear stories like this, it's like, how can we keep quiet in our homes, in the conversations? And, you made this comment about children, and raising children, and how do you raise children?
No, I didn't ask, how do you raise children?
I'm sorry,
I'm
like,
talking about people who are raising
people who
their
are raising
children.
their children like that,
Right.
right? So, I mean, I have young children also, and
But
I think.
I'm not talking about you, people who.
No,
raise their
I know,
children.
I'm giving you like a comparison. I agree with you, I think it's really important, and those people who are raising those kids like that, I don't know if those people are here, I'll be honest. But I think what we need to do is, those who came and who want to be part of the conversation, we have to keep taking it back, right? We have to keep having those conversations with those people, whoever those people are, in our mosque communities, whichever mosque community we got, and just push the pendulum. Push it, make it uncomfortable. If you hear them say something, not you, but if somebody hears somebody say something, being able to say, hey, Will, you shouldn't say that to your son. Or, hey, Tariq, the way you just did that to your daughter is hey, let's have it. I mean, don't be rude about it, but have a conversation. And I think it's important to also, again, having the kids go into other communities and cross communities is really important, because if they don't see, if my kids don't see people who don't look like them, why are they going to think that there's any other types of Muslims, right? And Hind made a really good point, and Tariq made this point too, and I think you did also. I mean, our religion is a beautiful religion. It's why it is the fastest growing religion. However, we have to keep having these conversations so it can continue to be stronger, not just we bring people in and then we're so distorted, right? And people don't stay, because that's another issue in that sense. So
Okay.
There's a question.
And I just want to add, sorry, very quickly, that the work cannot start when the offense is made. The work has to start by building relationships with people in our community first, so that when something does happen, there is a relationship for you to lean on with that person. You have rapport, you have trust. If you start when the guy that you never bothered to give salams to says something racist, well, you're probably not going to reach him, right? You have to be a member of the community in a very deep sense. So this work, it sounds like sort of stressful, right? Like calling out racism in a community can be a tough thing to do. But if we're all together in a common community already, that really softens the blow. And we have I mean, we have a sunnah for these sorts of things. We have our own adab that we can lean on in situations like this. So I'll leave it there.
There's a question right here.
So something that Zur talked about, and a little bit of what you talked about, first of all, like the privilege and examining that privilege. You mentioned that, you know, like you have the privilege of like walking into a masjid and not being identified as a convert. And we all like identify as like someone, like Kim said that she identifies as African and Black. And I always feel like I have this privilege of like walking around being Muslim and not being visibly brown and Muslim. And so I kind of escape like some of the hateful words that people might throw at my brothers and sisters. But then the invisibility also makes me invisible at the mosque. But then I feel like, is the problem that we self-identify as segmented people, or this averse feeling of why we don't like to be misidentified? So if I'm being, I don't like being perceived as a convert, but then what's wrong with being perceived as a convert? That's like what we think in our heads. So if you think that, okay, you're Black and people perceive you as South Asian, what's wrong with being perceived as South Asian? It's because inside of us, we have a preconceived notion, or we treat people a certain way. And that's why we don't like to be misidentified. So, but that makes me uncomfortable. Like, I don't know where the problem is. Is it because we identify culturally with ethnic group or nationality? Or is it because we perceive other people as, like this gentleman said, like as less, we are superior than them?
I would say, I'll jump in on that, sorry. I don't think we should hide or be shy or be ashamed of your culture or of our individual identities, right? It makes us who we are, and it makes us strong as people, and it makes us strong as a community. I think a lot of this, if we're honest, comes down to this superior attitude that is rooted in arrogance, right? So if I'm looking at you and saying, oh, you're not Muslim enough, or, oh, I don't even know if you're Muslim, it's like, well, why am I even looking at you like that, right? Why am I not just looking at you from a place of love instead of a place of all these other emotions? And I do think that some of these roots come from like working on our own selves and our own heart, right? Like you can't do anything for anyone if you don't have your own shop in order, right? And I do think that there's something said about the elements of your own heart and, you know, these characteristics or diseases of the heart and things like that that play into a factor of how you treat other people then, right? So there's one thing to think something, and then there's something to act on it. Both of them, you know, if you're thinking a racist thought but not acting it, or thinking a, you know, misogynistic thought and not acting on it, it's still something that needs to be worked on. I just think it's a matter of how we're like kind of projecting some of that stuff out that really comes down to it, which is something that we each have to work on then in order for the community to get better.
Yes,
I would add.
go ahead. I'll quickly say that, you know, you bring up a lot of really interesting and intriguing points. And I think for me, what it leads to me remembering is that the thing that bothers me when people assume that I'm South Asian isn't that I don't like South Asians. It's, you know, it's that it leads me to think that the person I'm engaging with has a single story of Islam. And that single story of Islam or that single story of race does not include people from Africa, directly from Africa, who looks like me. And it doesn't include practices of Islam that are as varied as, you know, as the billion and plus Muslims there are. And I think that that's something that we as Muslims, you know, have to challenge ourselves to think about, like, what do we consider to be a normative, you know, story of Islam, right? And I posit that there is no normative story of Islam. If I'm praying at an Albanian masjid, and these are white people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and their culture is a very European culture, and that is Islam. If I'm praying at a Cambodian masjid, that to me, you know, I don't think that people have to be a certain way to be Muslim. And that's what I'm reacting to when I see, for instance, spokespeople for Muslims on TV, and they're almost always South Asian men or Arab women. And it's fine, that's part of the story, but it is not the entire story. And I think that's why I get this reaction. Plus, I cannot eat spicy food, and people never believe me. And I'm like, no, really? Like, I really cannot eat this food. I'm not actually South Asian. I am.
I would add
still
quickly.
can't.
I would add really quickly that, and I want to take this back to the larger view, is that our symptoms that we see as Muslims are really a representation of the problems that we face as human beings. We don't recognize one another as Muslims because we don't recognize each other as human beings. We can't do one without the other. The other part of this is, unfortunately, once again, I go back to our thinking. We don't really realize how color conscious we are. We don't realize how ingrained that is, and we don't understand that the whole purpose behind this idea of white supremacy, or looking at dark as being from a deficit model and lighter complexion, the fair and lovely, right? We don't realize that the whole reason behind that is to detach us from our humanity. And that is the only purpose that it solves, that it serves. I can tell you, I stopped counting at a certain point when I remember growing up, when people would ask me and find out what my name is. Like, I know what the Arabic pronunciation of my name is. I know it's not Tariq, right? That's the Americanized, but that's, my mother called me Tariq. My father said Tariq. I know it's Tariq, right? My original Arabic teacher growing up in grammar school, Sister Nusrat Butt from Pakistan, right? So I got my pronunciation down early, but it was one of those offenses that you get where people come to you, do you know what your name means? If you don't get out of my face. But I also understand that comes from a place of sometimes it's genuine ignorance, because their worldview has been shaped in a way where they don't see that there's anything outside of themselves. Last thing I want to mention very quickly is that it's not enough just the idea of education is important, right? But we don't point back to a model that was just based on education. When we talk about the Ummah, we talk about the Sahaba, we point back to a working model, a model that where there was relationship, there was actual movement, and that to me, if you have movement, and that's a big part of what the lunch pad is, where we have DePaul, their MSA, where they have been with us for like the past 4 years. And these are young, from the Desi, outer, we got Lebanese, and I mean everybody, right? White, and they come down. What's up, Joe?
Hey, what's up?
Where they come and they have had opportunities to work in these communities, not with a Muslim community, just with the African American community. That community that is often looked at outside of, right? Not even gonna recognize you as an African American Muslim, but I'm not gonna recognize you as an African American because we got names, Abid, right? We got, and I also make it a point to find out what the disrespectful name is in whatever language, so I can keep my ears open. So, what's it, Kalu?
Yep.
Yeah. So if I hear that, right, we have a problem. But all of that to say that the change that has come over these young people in particular, because they've been sensitized in a way to the humanity of this community that is often looked at from a deficit model. And the very last thing that I give to you is this: my privilege, my main privilege, is that I come from a people whose humanity was their attempt was to ground it out. The attempt was to make them forget that they were human beings, and it didn't work. And that is the legacy to me of what Islam really means. You keep that connection with your Creator. Whatever you go through, you still remain what Allah made you.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I'd like to make just a couple of points. I mean, I'll just make a couple of statements. And like in reference to the movie Siege, where the Muslims were, were locked up in the camps. And to me, that could have probably happened in this country, but the only reason it didn't happen because there's such a large amount of African Americans that are Muslims. Now, to me, that's what kept Muslims out of the camps. Another point I'd like to make too is that, Muslims from India, Pakistan, Arabia, listen to the music, and the music is more African, they dance more African than anything else. So I don't know what's the big deal,
That sounds like some people have judged the Islamic. Some people have judged the Islamic community as somewhat of a business as well as a religion, and it's just like you cannot do one without the other. So, follow me, respect for Islam. Give me your opinion about that.
So just make sure they understood the question. You want them to weigh in on religion as business or the role that money plays in the Islamic religion? Is that what you're asking? I think there's clarify your question.
Your question was?
As Islamic as it's like a business. But this is just an opinion of others and religion. So if you have the business in Islam and you have a religion in Islam, they are both supporting one another. Give me your opinion of the distinction.
You're saying that business and Islam, that they work together or exist together? Or to give a comparison, are you saying like some people say the church is a business? Is that what you're saying? Are you talking about the influence of money in religion?
I'm saying that with religion,
yes,
you draw people that support.
Yeah, I understand what you said.
So, you understand that?
I think
Well, go ahead.
I think what you're saying is that if you have a community that's their religion, and you open up a meat market, and it becomes that you rely on that population to feed your business. Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
So there's this, people who are writing books about Islam are making money off of Islam. You have speakers, you have consultants,
Right.
So it becomes, it's intertwined with your livelihood. Muslim schools, Islamic schools, those kind, is that?
Yes. Exactly. I didn't want her, I at least wanted the answer. But I want it from the panel over here.
Oh, I didn't answer, I was just trying to clarify.
No, I appreciate that.
You did give it the way, it should be approached some way.
I don't see that as being unique to Islam. I think that is just a function of community. You have schools, you have businesses, you have academics, you have entertainment, you have music, culture, and sometimes it is specific to that demographic. And other times it may go beyond just that particular group. But I don't. From what I understand of your question, I don't think it's a phenomenon for Muslims. If the intent or the insinuation was more in line with the commercialization of religion in general, then I'd be interested to, if that was that the intent, or
You hit part of it, but there's like maybe 7 strong views that the public have come together and ask these kind of questions.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you got, okay, if you just say you got people that come in from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and they decide that they want a new mosque, but they don't have the enough people that's supporting the zakat or whatever, okay?
Right.
So now, all of a sudden, Donald Trump let the flooded ban lift, and thousands of people coming. Now, all of a sudden, you have this one mosque that's flooded with people. Now you gotta go and try to get another one a little bit bigger or somewhere else. So, you're looking for this money that comes out of their pocket in order to establish a bigger mosque somewhere else.
My brother Will mentioned the idea that one of the things that we see here is that most of our masjid are community centers, right? Now, when they're operating in that capacity, that means that they're looking to be places of that provide, you know, social bonding, but also they are potentially places that are providing services. And when you're working in that model, that puts your fundraising, if you will, I think it puts it in a different light, in my opinion. When you are a masjid of service, as opposed to we just want to build a new minaret, you know, or we want a new place just to have a new place. Because I'm of the opinion that our masjid should be places that are of service to the external community as well as the internal.
There's a couple questions. Someone's got a mic. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. So something I've noticed, and maybe Will can experience this as another pale-faced white convert, is that unfortunately I've noticed that a lot of white converts I've noticed tend to be very fetishized to the extent where you look at it in all of American converts. In order for them to be, you know, tokenized or put on or praised, they have to pull something big like a Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali before a lot of other Muslims will give them the time of day. The average white convert, I've noticed a lot of Muslims see kind of as a status symbol to have a white person embrace Islam or to become active in the mosque or things of that sort. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, white Muslim scholars, but you go to a lot of these Islam conferences, you see more white Muslim scholars than more black Muslim scholars, to the extent where when you look at proportions, it's not even out. The question I have is that, like, what, and even I've experienced cases of even I've noticed people become close to me because they even see me as a status symbol because I am a white convert. The question I want to ask is, what could like white converts do to like sort of not unintentionally, not so you could say, to check themselves before they realize that they're getting certain privileges, certain accesses just because they are white? You understand the question?
Oh, yeah.
This will take 3 hours to discuss.
Very much so. Yeah, you know, that can definitely happen. It's something that I've noticed. That hasn't been my experience universally with everyone seeing me as some sort of status symbol. But it has happened. And, you know, I think that the first thing that you can do is, and this is obviously easier said than done, don't let it go to your head. But, you know, I would say more broadly, a white person who embraces Islam is inevitably going to be faced with their own privilege. Because either you as a Muslim or as someone who comes to know and love other Muslims are going to experience something of the Islamophobia that all Muslims are subjected to in this country. And you're going to experience for the first time your privilege not buying you the thing that you want, which is, you know, a sort of unquestioning universal acceptance. Now, I think those moments where we experience that, those should be the moments that we really reflect on, rather than the moments where we're, you know, put on the pedestal, right? And I think it's easy to let the moments where we're put on the pedestal go to our head. But my advice to new white Muslims is, pay attention to the moments where you don't feel white anymore. Even if it's for a brief second. Ask yourself, what just happened in that moment? Because there's a lot that we have to learn. And I think that if we don't take a moment to reflect and try to learn those lessons, we're not only missing an opportunity to humble ourselves before our Creator, but we're also missing an opportunity to really get to know the people that we're in community with. Does that start to answer your question?
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I think there's one in the back, and got time for a few more questions, and then I want to make sure we have time for socializing. Okay, in the back, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. The question that I have is, when we often talk about following the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, I think it's limited to certain things. But I rarely see Muslims talking about following the sunnah of the Prophet in terms of, how he respected diversity, how he respected women. Like just looking at from things as the physical structure of a mosque, where men, children, let's not forget the children, and women all had an equal place, same floor, to deeper things, like positions of leadership, like looking at the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions were quite diverse, racially, and had high, looking at the status of Bilal, the status of many of his Sahaba, who were actually quite a diverse group of people, which is remarkable, when you think about it at the time. And so I'm just wondering, why are we not, when we talk about following the Sunnah, why are we not following the Sunnah when it comes to the character of the Prophet, and it's particularly how I really think he was, when we talk about feminism, like a true feminist, and truly someone who believed in equality. And why are we not hearing that more in Muslim circles versus more of like external dress? Not that I'm minimizing that, but just, or the importance of that, but I'm not hearing about that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I can definitely start, and then I'm sure others will want to follow it on that as well. I think a lot of this comes back to, we started talking about conversations about cultures and the importance. And I do want to, there's a really good article called Islam and the Cultural Imperatives that Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah wrote. Check it out, read it. It has highly informed me in the work that I do when it comes to gender relations, because there's a direct connection between cultural influences when people come from other countries into this country and how that plays out into gender relations. Women in Islam, Inc. did a two studies back in 2000 and then 2011. And in both studies, they traveled around the nation and surveyed different mosques, basically. And out of that study, basically came down to what low percentages of women are in leadership positions, on boards, like in terms of representation. We have a big movement. We have high percentages of things like dividers, which wasn't there in the Prophet ﷺ's time. Your great comparison about the men, children, women, right? No dividers, one open space, and yet across the nation, a lot of our mosques and masjids don't look like that. They don't look like that at all. In fact, and they go to the degree that happened to you, where you're actually not allowed, and that's happened to me, right? Where I'm literally told I cannot actually enter this masjid.
Actually, I did, but not when they were around.
So I think the reason why, and what this article does is breaks down, one, the beauty of the culture and how it brings it in, and what women in Islam were able to do was also look at what those cultural influences, because there's certain groups, so specifically the Imam Mu'adhin Muhammad, which you've heard both of these referenced as huge foundations for their spirituality, they were the most open, the most inclusive to women. And so then you have to take it down a notch and you wonder, okay, well, why is that? Why is that compared to it was something like 60%, and I can get you the study because I have it on our website, that where it was, they were highly inclusive to women and people felt very comfortable, versus the Arab and Indo-Pak community, which was kind of grouped together as immigrant community, which in itself has issues with that terminology, but where it was much lower in terms of that. And the reason, if you think about it, and I think Imam Tariq said this, and in fact, I think you, brother, said this too, around Islam wasn't new to America. And culture, when we came here, the reason why that community, because that community has been around for a very long time, right? So Black Muslims have been here for a very long time, and the American culture is rooted, right? So this concept of equity, this concept of not having these tensions, the gender tensions, you don't see it when you go to the Imam Muradin community. You don't see it when you go to other Black Muslim spaces. I've been spending a lot more time over the last couple of years, and I find it fascinating because of the role that I'm trying to play with gender relations and improving that. The connection when I'm in these other spaces and how empowering it is for me to say, yeah, this is actually how it is supposed to be. This is what the Prophet told us it should be, right? And this is how it can be because it exists right now. So some of it is, and I think your question is, why don't we talk about that? We're talking about it. I would love to just keep talking about it, right? I think part of it is when you equip, I go into masjids, and we as an organization, Muslim Women's Alliance, we have this program called Inclusive Spaces Program. We're working with 2 masjids here in the Chicago community. One of them, we've already delivered findings to them on recommendations and how structurally, on how raising women's voices, on how bringing more women in. There's all sorts of goals, and I don't want to take the time to go into all of that. I'm happy to have a conversation more about that program afterwards. But part of it is you have to go and literally have these somewhat contentious conversations with board leadership. So there are times you're sitting in this room, and mind you, a lot of times it's just men in this room because that's what's making up the board leadership of our masjids. But if you don't show up, if you don't push, and sometimes it takes a year to have that meeting happen, of constant, I was told at one of these like fundraisers, oh yeah, there's the harasser. And I laughed and I was like, oh, I think you mean collaborator, because that's actually what I am, right? Because that's the truth is, and I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna keep going longer on this, but the truth is, a lot of the stuff we're talking about, whether we're talking about some of the racial stuff that we've been talking about, whether we're talking about gender relations, it's rooted in matters of the heart, because it's either rooted in a feeling like I am better or I deserve more or I can take more, right? So we talk about privileges. I can't walk and you can't walk into a masjid in an unknown area without having your blood pressure raised because you're like, is this gonna be okay or is someone gonna say something to me? Am I gonna walk into the wrong entrance? Am I gonna go into the wrong area? Oh my God, I'm just trying to pray, right? The women are all shaking their heads and nodding because we've all been there. This is the reality. And it's not Islam, right? Back to this brother's comment, it is not Islam. That is not what Islam is. That is not what we have been taught. But we have to have the open conversations. We need to go to leadership, and we need to not go with a, hey, you're wrong, I'm right, we just gotta make this work. It's a, hey, look, how do we have this conversation? How do we talk? How do we help each other? It is not an adversarial, it's a, how do we work on this together type of attitude. And I will not forget 2 years ago when I had Will and his family at my house one day, having the same conversation, and I was getting really passionate. And I remember one thing that he said to me that stays with me, and I think is really important advice for everyone in this room, because I hope all of you something happens in your heart tonight, and we all become change agents, and we all keep pushing this forward. Is he listened and listened and listened very quietly, and then when I was done, he goes, Inshallah, inshallah, he goes, just remember, change takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And pace yourself. And I remember thinking like, wait, what? But then it resonated because I realized, you're right, it does take time. So don't give up, it takes time and it takes multiple people, right? Movements don't happen with one person. So sorry, that was long.
Should I listen quietly and not speak?
Please speak.
That was a great answer. I don't have much to add except that I think when we engage in this type of work, it's very important to remember what the sunnah of doing this work is, as you said, and what the adab of doing, the manners of doing this work. Because I think something that is really phenomenal that you're seeing maybe for the first time in a long time in the Muslim community is that Muslims are getting very interested in activism and social justice. and it's wonderful. But at the same time, we have almost as a community rushed into this enterprise in a way that we haven't really had time to reflect. How do we engage in social justice as Muslims, as people who rely on the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as our model of affecting change? And so, like, one example that I think is especially poignant, I'm on Twitter, like it's the one form of social media that I do. Like, you see a call-out culture on Twitter, right? Name and shame. If someone has done something wrong, they're gonna get their little at so-and-so, you did something wrong, and putting you on blast in front of the whole community. Well, oftentimes there is an actual issue that needs to be rectified there, but at the same time, is that prophetic adab? Like, no, it's not. You come to a person in private and address issues in private first and foremost. Like, calling someone out in public is just not something that we are taught to do by the Prophet. So, I think that it's important, I'm glad that you brought up the role of the Sunnah in this, because it's something that we should rely on, and really that we should reflect on as we engage in this type of work, because we have examples on how to do this. We don't have to go into this blind.
If I could add very, very quickly to that comment, that maybe as the larger Muslim community has begun to become more active or involved in activism, lest we not forget that the African American Muslim community, that is a part of its history, right? So, been doing that, and I would invite for the broader Muslim community to feel like that is a part of their history, and it is not something that is detached from them, because we look at the history, we connect with this idea of the spiritual lineage, of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And we all claim that history. And I feel that the larger Muslim community, the immigrant who just got here today, should identify themselves with that history that was here before they got here, that has made it, that took the lumps, so that we can have conversations, so that we can have masjids, so we can build, you know what I mean, so we can have our own institutions. Last thing I want to mention quickly is that we must understand is that the nature of people and the impact of power has an influence, power has an effect, and sometimes it doesn't mean that people are bad people, but the effects of power and what power does to people in terms of they look to make sure they don't lose power. But Islam, religion, right, it's common sense, first of all, right? We all have common sense. And the second thing is that it should empower you. So any position that we find ourselves in where we feel like we are being disempowered while our agency is taken away from us, let your common sense kick in. And you speak nicely at first, but afterwards, and I'm not trying to be combative, but I just don't think we have the time because what happens is we wait, and we pass off these same problems to our children. And they inherit the same struggle that we have right now. So there's a sense of urgency that we need to attack these things, these problems with. We speak nicely at first to folks. Look, you can't have an all-male board. It just doesn't make sense, right? And if you don't want to listen, because I talked to you in private, right? Then I'll put you on blast.
There's 2 more questions, and then she's got bike.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to say first, thank you guys for coming out. It's been very beneficial so far. I'm over here. The irony with prejudice is that it's not hard to not be prejudiced. It takes effort to look at someone and dictate what they can or cannot do. Unfortunately, I've experienced more prejudice within the Muslim community than outside of it, which is ridiculous. It's probably because when I enter a mosque, the first thing people say is, where are you from? It's like, can I get a how are you? Assalamu alaikum. You're going to go straight to that. I don't mind that question, but it feels like they're trying to figure out if I'm from their people or from an other. And I feel like people can talk about things like this for days on end, but I wanted to ask you, especially if there's anyone in this room that has influence in their communities or mosques, are there any literal approaches that you have seen work in other communities that encourage interracial relations?
Working together, service projects. Those are the easiest things. I think the masjid, and to a sense, and that's why a lot of times I don't even like talking to people in the masjid, to be quite honest sometimes, because they have a difficulty in actually letting you know who they really are. But you take people outside of those spaces, social events, bowling, things where, it's nice and easy, but cleanups, social events, those are great opportunities for people to connect without having to worry about somebody checking their wudu, checking if their pants are rolled up too tight or if their beard is not long enough, or the hijab, you know what I mean? So we take the judgment factor out of it in those situations, and then we can maybe work our way back into the masjid.
It's almost 9 and the lights are gonna, I know everyone feels.
I've patiently sat here, waited. I mean, we've had a nice, polite, tame conversation, but you know what? People's salvation is at stake. And when you look at interracial relationships, we only got that going on the west side with the liquor stores, and on the south side in Inglewood with the urban food deserts. There are board members and presidents of these mosques who have businesses in those communities. And you know what? Hurt people hurt people. Yeah. There's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hurt. And these people end up on Fox, and there are tons of YouTube videos of people, why I left Islam. So I hope next time when we sit and have this conversation, we will get beyond this, polite kind of, nice, let's not hurt anybody's feelings. Because the bottom line is, I don't want my daughter here 10 years from now, sitting again, having a nice, polite conversation. And I'm so glad Dr. King didn't sit down with Bull Connor in private and say, oh, you might want to stop sicking dogs on people. I mean, no, people need to be put on blast because you know what? People's salvation is at stake. And I'm glad WBEZ got to entertain people. But you know what would really be nice, since you are public radio, you should give this community a voice on your station, a regular voice.
I will take that back to the station. I hear you. Well,
how much time do we have?
Yeah,
we can do that.
You can certainly address. I don't want to leave that hanging for sure. Yes. No, I want to make sure this gentleman gets a chance to have what he just said addressed.
Well, I think since I made the comment about addressing people in private first, I'll do my best to speak to your comment. When harm is being done, the harm needs to be removed before any type of conversation takes place. So I hope that I am not understood to be saying that conversations need to be proceeding while people are continuing to be abused. That is absolutely not the case, and I don't think that that's what our tradition teaches us.
Well, I know that's not what I read and study.
Me neither.
Exactly.
I don't think, and that's not what he was.
That's, again, let's not let him speak, please, for himself. Don't rush in and try to let him grow up. Let him take some hits. Thank you. No, I'm serious because we spend too much time. No, that's not what he meant. I mean,
I wasn't going to say that.
I mean, when the prophet was rude, in Surah Abbas, when the prophet was rude, Allah reprimanded him. He didn't make up an excuse for him.
No, and that's not what I was going to do. That's not what I was going to do.
Okay, well, thank you. Go ahead.
Are you agreeing or disagreeing with me?
You know what? I'm just sitting here, and like I said, this is about her. This isn't about me. Because I've already taken Shahada. I've done the best I can. I've done the best I can do with what I got. I want to see a better ummah for her.
As do I. I have children as well.
Let's stop being polite and let's stop.
I'm sorry.
I want to understand your grievance, though.
What I'm not getting is we can have a real conversation without being disrespectful to one another. And what I'm not getting is, and I feel the anger, right? And I'm sure it's justified, but I would like it articulated in a way where I can respond to it in a way that brings us to a point where we can have some meaningful action, right? So we can have an honest conversation. If we haven't been doing it up to this point, I didn't realize that. But what can we talk about? Because you mentioned some serious things, and we've talked about. I've had these same conversations that we have liquor stores in our communities that are owned by Muslims, and we address that. That's not something that we don't talk about. I wish that we would have jumped off on this earlier. I just want us to have a real dialogue. I thought that's my point.
And for my part, I hear your anger, but I want to hear what you would like to see addressed as well, because I haven't understood it yet.
Yeah.
And I did want to
That was
understand.
very clear.
Well,
But it's fine. Have your show. It's fine.
I don't know. I
Just
think
do
we
what
all want
I
to hear
need
what you have to say.
I'll just do what I need to do for my kid.
I have 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters
Oh,
also.
that's good.
Can I?
Bruh,
I don't want to leave it here.
No, go ahead. I mean, this is fine. I mean, this is their show.
Honestly, there is no, just so you know, there isn't a program that's not being broadcast. We responded to a community request to come out and have the conversation. So there's no show, we're not trying to create a story here. The purpose of this is really to talk and have an open dialogue, and so I just want to be clear that is what everybody who came here, that's what they came here to do, that's what they wanted to do. I think they feel like they want to respond to
We
your
just have to
question.
understand, right? I mean, I think to both of their points is, I think we were trying to be honest. There was the intention to be honest. We were honest with the questions we're asking, what we're addressing. But I think in order to further.
And then I was honest, and the imam's mad.
No,
he didn't even get what
Look,
I said.
What I'm just not understanding why.
Call security. I'll walk out.
I think I might be able to help.
No.
Bro, we just talked about love.
I think, you know what? I'm not going to pretend to be somebody.
Can I just please?
Yeah, maybe.
To
Yeah.
speak for
Can everybody hear?
to speak for my whole, generation of new Muslims, I feel like we need to really just, I'm sorry, but I think that,
we really need to stop this, race before Islam, because I feel like when I go into school, they see me as a Muslim. They see me with a hijab on, which means that I am a Muslim. And I'm so proud to be a Muslim. So I don't see why we're, of course it is a huge problem, and I'm not saying that I don't see color. I'm just saying that, we need to really work on, I want to work on my Islam. Everybody is trying to work on their Islam. I'm not worried about, what's, who's selling what, when we go into these masjids, like you were saying about people mistaking you for being South Asian, I'm Palestinian and I'm black. And I cannot tell you how many times I'm out with my mother, who's Palestinian, she's not black. And it's like, are you adopted? Oh, that's your mother. So it's I get it, and I understand that race is a huge issue, especially for Americans in general, Muslim or not. But also, I need to say, we're not worried about that. When people ask me questions about Islam, it's about Islam. It's not about, Palestinians or blacks. It's about Islam, and they're trying to learn about Islam. They're not trying to take in what's being shown on the television. They're trying to talk to real Muslims, talk to people who are Muslims, and really try to understand what Islam is and what we do, because we're not all terrorists. And honestly, of course it's a very important conversation, but I've just been sitting here listening, and I just, that's all.
I think, so I've been listening to the conversation. And it actually is reminding me of Bina's question or comment earlier about, you know, why do we follow some parts of the Sunnah? Well, why do some Muslims follow some parts of the Sunnah and cherry pick? And what's reminding, what I'm thinking about as I'm hearing this is that I really think that this particular conversation that we're having today, that I really hope that Muslims have all the time, that I think Sapelo Square does a really great job and Muslim art does really great jobs of curating online, is that there's two aspects to this issue that I'm hearing, right? And the first is systemic racism. And you mentioned yourself, America is one of the most racist societies on earth. I mean, it was founded based on two very racist it's founded on racism, and it's filtering down, and we see that every day. And we see systematically what that looks like. It looks like Arab people, Arab Muslims, whose mosques I attended as a child, opening liquor stores, making a lot of money in communities that they don't live in communities that they're contributing to the food deserts and contributing to all sorts of social ills that in Islam are not acceptable, right? It is not acceptable to even touch alcohol, much less sell it, right? And sell it and make your living from that, right? This is a systemic issue. The other challenge that we're looking at is the interpersonal question. What does it look like to have an interpersonal relationship with Will and his family? What does it look like to have an interpersonal relationship with an East Asian Muslim when she walks into my mosque, right? And I think that this is why I think I'm happy that we're having a conversation, but we're really having conversations on these, we're looking at two different angles. And so when you think about, and Surur, you keep mentioning this of like check your heart, like really look at the disease of the heart. That's a personal response to a personal challenge. But when we think about systemic injustice, which is rooted in racial injustice, you know, then it's not necessarily checking the heart, but it's actually picking up that bullhorn and marching down the streets. And I think this is, for me, this is where I see that there's a gap with a lot of Muslims from immigrant origin backgrounds, because they have still not, and I'm saying they, I'm from an immigrant origin background, but frankly, a lot of the Sudanese people I know are pretty down with a lot of the social justice issues, but they still haven't gotten to the point where they're saying Islam is a liberating force in my soul, and it also must be a liberating force for the society in which I live. I think that's the conversation that we as a Muslim community in America need to have personally in our mosques and at the societal level.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's not a show, honestly. She's in charge of the room, and I'm being told.
Very brief.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
I think that the point that Doug is making is that sometimes when we are on these panels dealing with these issues, we're not really talking about the real issues. We're talking around the issues. We start talking about the heart. People having, this is an internal problem. We're talking about children who are being raised like this, and these children are acting out. I can show you right now, they had a meeting in Tunisia about the same issue. This is all over the Muslim world. You even have slavery in Muslim countries. You have a lot of the immigrants coming from Africa on those boats trying to escape Africa. The blacks are thrown off the boats. These are real issues in the whole Muslim world. Let's deal with the real issues, right? It's not just here. I can play a poem for you. It's in Arabic though, and someone would have to translate it, that deals with this. You have in the African American community now a little bit more sensitive. The reason why? Because so many African Americans are leaving Islam because there's more racism that they're experiencing among Muslims than they're experiencing in white America. That's the issue.
I think you have more interaction with the front row people and with ignoring them to the back. They are taking most of the time. The only one thing I want to say, and I'm making my way to say it because you're not giving me time, is the most of the discussion which has been today, that is focused on the mosque going, Only 7 to 10% Muslim go regularly to the mosque. So the rest of the 90% may go occasionally, maybe just to attend a funeral, or maybe a wedding, or maybe once a while a Jummah prayer. So your focus has been only to the mosque-going people. That's the discussion has been. Now the second thing which I want to mention humbly is that we need to address the people who are 90% of them. Now I have a first-hand experience with dealing with the interracial thing. I married, successful marriage of 40 years with an African-American Muslimah, alhamdulillah, and I have raised 3 daughters. I just lost one last year, but I'm saying sometimes we are overconscious too. When me and my wife and children were going, walking down somewhere in Wisconsin, we are in Chicago and we were traveling, and somebody, this one white lady asked, look at my daughter and then look at my wife, say, are you babysitting? Okay. And I told my wife, she could be completely sincere. Sometimes we are overconscious. Okay. I mean, it doesn't mean, if my wife and my daughters are together, they will say, where are you from? Doesn't mean, we have to have a positive attitude at the same time towards other people, regardless they are Muslim or non-Muslim, they are black, white, brown, whatever they are. So that's the one attitude we have. But secondly, as I said earlier, we need to address the situation of those people, 90% of them. And I will say, for the mosque, if you don't like it, don't give them your money.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and taking part in this conversation. And I just want to let you all know on your way out, if you have other questions on this topic or other topics, you can leave them for our team, because we're always looking for questions, hoping to address concerns that are out in the community. We will follow up, so feel free to leave your questions there. And it seems like there are many more conversations to be had, so I don't expect we'll leave it here. But thank you all for joining us.